All right, Matt, let's get started. So we've talked about how you are a fourth generation owner of DeBarra Masonry. You are a co-founder for Contractor Consultants, helping contractors find, vet, and hire top talent. And today we are going to talk a lot about hiring women, how to get more women interested, how to get women hired. But before that, let's let everybody hear your story because what I Google stalked you on, it sounds like you started out as a laborer in the family company. Is how old were you? Curious. And how did your whole progression go from that until when you became an owner of the company in 2011, right?
Right. I mean, I started like most of us young in the field in a family business. I was told growing up that, we needed to learn the business. That was really something that was important to my family was to learn it and then decide. So it was kind of like you can't say no if you don't like a food if you've never tried it, but in business. So that was the childhood. I started first day on the job, I was 9 years old, little rite of passage, bought the work boots. This was back when my dad used to take pictures of the jobs and we'd have to go every Friday and develop the film to like and add his to his portfolio. So and even though there's a young face, I'm probably dating myself a little bit. But yeah, started young in the field and grew from there. Worked every summer and then all through high school. And then later took over the business.
What were your steps in progression from laborer to owner? Like what other positions did you officially or unofficially hold?
I did all of them. So my dad did something that I ended up, well, he took it from my grandfather, who took it from my great grandfathers, but it's been passed down that we pay based on performance. And so my dad took out a sheet of paper. I was within the first week of the job, and I started making $3 an hour, and my mom was my representative, and she said, just give him 25 a day flat. And he says, no, he'll punch in and punch out. And so they would argue about the quarters and, that like not argue, but it was like my dad would make my mom break a dollar bill to pay the 50 cents because that's what I was owed instead of just, so my dad was kind of a by the book person, but yeah, we had a performance pay system. So my dad's like, you can mix mortar, you get 50 cents an hour more. You learn to cut brick, you get 25 cents. And so he literally
Oh,
wrote out a menu, and that was my roadmap for learning quickly. And I mean, I would just go to him and I'd be like, Dad, I think I can cut brick now. And he'd be like, show me. And I'd be like, cut it, and then he'd be like, that's pretty good. And then next day I had that raise, and that kind of followed through the whatever it's been. I don't even know, 22 years at this point.
so you've been a laborer, you've been a hod carrier, you've been a mason, you've been a foreman, I assume. So you've done the whole business so that you could really learn how to run the business. And that's one of the things that I love about when I got out of college and I started with the general contractor J.E. Dunn. They put me in the carpenter's apprenticeship program, and I had to physically learn how to build buildings. I had to physically learn how to work in the heat and the cold and how it affected the performance, how it affected the productivity, and I think that a lot of people just they don't want to do that part of it. But man, I mean, there were days I didn't want to do it. I'm sure you felt the same. But without actually doing it, I wouldn't have learned everything that I learned to be able to be the superintendent operations director that I was. Is there anything in the field particularly that you learned that you feel like there's no way I would have really understood this from a business perspective another way?
I mean, there was so much for me. I think running crews, running and managing crews, the different personalities, managing homeowners and problems. I was 17 years old and I hit a gas line that wasn't marked, that the GC didn't end up calling in a dig alert, and to save time, and I'm 17 years old driving a mini excavator and clip the gas line. I mean, there's just things that you can't, when you're dealing with life and safety and homes or
Yeah.
businesses, because we did commercial and government work. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you just kind of learn in the field, but that crisis management and then dealing with different personalities. And I mean, there's a lot that I think you just kind of have to cut your teeth on.
Yeah. So you mentioned that in your family, people try out the business and see if they like it or not. So do you have sisters? And if so, did they try and did they stay?
So I don't know if I don't think I've ever told this story publicly. So I have two
Yay!
sisters. Oh yeah, this is the first. I have two sisters, one much younger than the other. And my sister that's closer in age, 3 years apart, she officially lasted about 3 hours in the family business. Um, I drove her to the office and she was like, I don't think I want to do this. Dad and I, he's tough. Like, I don't think this is the right move. And I was like, just give it a try. It was the start of a summer. I think she might have been, I don't know, 16, 17, something to that effect. And we get to the office and my dad's like, hey, can you print this contract? I have to go meet this client. And my sister goes to turn on the printer and the printer doesn't turn on because there's no cord behind it. Somebody took the cord. So she's like, Dad, where's the cord? He's like, oh, it's in the like open the cabinet, like look around. He starts getting annoyed. So she plugs in the printer and then she goes to turn it on, says no ink. So she's like, Dad, where's the ink? And he's like, oh, it's in the top cabinet. It's not in that drawer. So I can tell she's getting frustrated. He's like, why don't you just look for stuff first? Just look around before you ask me. So I could tell she's getting frustrated, finally puts the ink in, and then she goes, no paper. And she's like, Dad, where's the paper? And he's like, Jesus, won't you look? She's like, I'm done, Matt. I'm done. She's like, I'm done. I'm going home. And so that was kind of that was the official, my sister hung out for about 2 hours. I drove her home and that was her stint in the family business.
It's funny because so my dad, I don't know if we've talked about this. My dad owned an HVAC company. And so my brother started in the business probably around age 12. And I was never brought in, not because my dad didn't think I could do it. I just don't think it crossed his mind. But I love my dad. Today's actually my dad's birthday, the day that we're recording this. My dad's 79th birthday. But I love my dad, but we could never work together. That is just not something that would ever successfully work. So I can see that. But what's interesting to me is if my dad had put me in the office, I probably would have felt very similar to your sister. If my dad had put me in the field, actually doing something with my hands and creating and, bending metal or whatever, like I could have done starting out, or even just cleaning the shop, I would have liked that better, and I don't know that they would have known that at that age. But I think a lot of parents, especially back then and still today, they want to put the sons come out and help me build this deck, and the daughters, hey, why don't you go inside and work on this? And I think we miss out on a lot of things because, man, I'd much rather build a deck than go in and help my mom cook something. Like I can't stand to cook. So we all we all learn, right?
Yeah, my dad, I mean, my sister worked in the field. She at home, I mean, she was outside first. And so we already kind of found out that that wasn't her thing. I mean, she was out there mixing mortar with us, doing projects around the house for years, shoveling. My dad didn't have that any type of, I mean, he was like, you got two hands, they work? Okay, great, grab a shovel. That was my dad. And my sister had already kind of that whole side of it was like, she's like, it's cold, it's wet, I don't like it outside. Like, why am I doing this? So she had already kind of, so the office was really I think the last hope,
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
That's hilarious. Okay, so talking about the company, DeBarra Masonry, do you have tradeswomen in the field now?
we do not. We hire, I mean, we've kept the floodgates open. We've had a few make it to the assessment round, where they come and they do basically a paid skills assessment, but not at this time.
So why do you think, you said you've only had a few go through the assessment. What do you think is keeping women from being interested in that particular trade?
You know, I was thinking about this before we started today. So I went to a vocational high school. So I took every other week was a shop class. For me, I did masonry. And we had probably 4 or 5 women in my class that took masonry. Um, and and they were really good, really good. I think one of the big things was when you start and you go to high school, you're 15, I think. You start around that age, whatever, 14, somewhere in there, 14, 15, you're in high school. and especially at a trade school, I mean, we didn't have as much of the gender bias. I mean, we had women in welding, we had women in auto, auto body, we had men in cosmetology. I think it was because there were so many students and it was a hands-on trade school. Um, you had less of that. And so I think thinking back to that model working, it was because they were young. It wasn't, it wasn't like there was as much of a social stigma at that point. It was like you go from middle school to then this place where like, like for example, our welding teacher was a woman, our assistant teacher in auto body was a woman, and she had gone through the program. So I think young and in an environment where that's widely accepted. I mean, because I remember Lynn was probably the best in our best woman in our masonry program, and she just loved it. She's like, I picked up bricks. And the other thing was they had an interesting model because there was, I think, 50 or 60 different vocations at the school, and the way they did it was you had a week and you did like a 2 hour something to that effect, like a 2 hour stint in each one, and then you picked your top four,
Oh.
and then you would do a week in each of those four. But what they did is they would put you in ones that were, sometimes you ended up with one that you didn't put. For example, I did a week in cosmetology. So I learned how to like French braid, which my daughter's 2.5 now. And it's like, I'm like, wow, this thing kind of came in handy, but like you ended up doing this. And so a lot of women ended up they might've ended up in a welding or a masonry that they had never thought they wanted to do. And so that trade school model, I saw a lot of things reflecting on what we're talking about today. I saw a lot that worked then that I think if it were done more frequently would have a much bigger impact.
Yeah, so two things you've mentioned really, vocational schools and social stigma. And so talking about vocational schools, I think so many people today are saying we spent so much time in the last couple decades saying kids need to go to college. We've reduced even the shop classes in high schools. I don't know what's happened to actual vocational high schools, but just shop classes in high schools are smaller. So kids aren't even getting introduced, much less the girls getting pushed toward them, unless, like you said, you had a female welding instructor, which one of my friends, Deila Ray, is going to love hearing that you had that a couple decades ago. But when there's an instructor that's a female, it feels like, oh, wait, maybe I could do this. And I think that's part of that social stigma tying into it as well. When you see someone doing it, you feel like, oh, wait, that's open for me as well. There's also this social stigma, which I had not really thought about until I was watching a show this weekend. I was down at the lake and it was pouring down rain. So I just turned on the TV and tried a new show. And there was on this show, a couple of the scenes were related to a construction job site. And the manner in which they portrayed the construction workers, one, they were all men, but the way they portrayed them, the way they talked to people, and I was like, this is not helping us, right? And this show was a couple years old, but still I'm like, there is something in and it's going to sound silly to say, there's something in Hollywood that is also creating this social stigma about it being what construction actually looks like and what people are in it look like and how they act and how they talk. And is some of it true? Yes, it is. Um, but there's so much more to it than that, and it's evolved so much. So I would love to see I would love to see more vocational high schools and more women getting into shop classes and more high schools getting more shop classes. And I think that would help. I told I think I may have told this story on another episode, so I'll make it quick just because I want to tell you. But my niece, when she was 5 years old, we took her to this event we called Block Kids here in Kansas City. It's open to all gender kids in grade school, so she was really too young, but was in charge, so I may have let her in. And it's an opportunity. It's a Lego competition, but before the Lego competition, it is a bunch of trades there to show these kids what they can do. Like the ironworkers had a VR headset, and they were walking like they were actually walking on a beam. And They get to go up and down in a scissor lift, but one of the biggest areas is the masonry area, and the kids get to go over there and actually use the mortar, lay the bricks, and my niece did not want to leave that section. She loved it. And when she got home, a few days later, my mom was watching her and she's like, "How did you like it?" And she's like, "Oh, I want to grow up and be in construction." And at 5 years old, getting introduced to that and loving the bricklaying, we're not letting kids know about this early enough. How old, what kind of age group do you think is really good to start getting kids interested?
I mean, my daughter's 2.5, and I mean, I brought her around equipment, and I mean, yeah, 2 years old, everything was bulldozer, right? There was a bunny we had in the backyard, and we said, "What do you want to name it?" And she said, "Bulldozer." I mean, it was like, it's. I think allowing them to kind of see all different things is good because I look at it like this: the model in our family that worked was being exposed to a lot of different things, really leaning into the exposure, but then there was no pressure. My dad was like, "You're going to learn the trade because it's passed down. And no matter what, you have to understand what it's like to work with your hands." He's like, "But then you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, you want to travel, I will support you in anything you want to do." And it was just, for me, it was another, I think it was the more I was exposed to, and the vocational school is another one. I mean, who
Yeah.
would have thought I'm whatever you are, that young kid in school doing the braiding thing, and to pass the week, you have to do a mannequin with the like hair or whatever, right? And here I am now, 20, whatever it is, 5 years later, and my daughter's like, "Dad, can you do my hair?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, look at this skill that I." So I think being exposed to a lot of different things is good, and I think the younger the better because then they get to decide, and there's less social filters at a younger age.
Well, I like that. Social filters. I don't think I've heard that before. I'm making a note because I really like that. I'm using that. Um, okay, so let's talk about, excuse me, let's talk about the contractor consultants. You're the company that you're a co-founder of. Talk to us briefly about what this company does to help hire, vet, and find top talent.
Yeah, so I mean, it came about from an issue I had in the business. So that's really where it started. It wasn't like I'm going to start another business. It was, this is a problem for me and I wanted to solve it. And when we did, we realized there was a kind of a system that would work. And so once I had been taken advantage of by recruiters and I was just so fed up with the model, I'm hiring consultants and one thing they say is working, four things they say aren't. And I just really got fed up with what was happening. And so when I took over the hiring process in my company, figured out a model, we said, what would it look like to give this information to other people? And so it actually started with an online course. That was the first thing we did. And I was like, I'm going to put together, we made 63 video modules. It was just, I mean, it took us a year and a half to build it out. And when we went to go bring this to people, when we started advertising early on, the question we got was, "Hey, this is great, but can you just do this?" And so that led to kind of the next thing. So it was a very simple kind of set of steps. It was like, problem for me. Oh, I found a solution. I'm helping local contractors, people across the country do it. Let me put this in a course so I can just send them a file. It's easier. And I was passionate about it. And then it went to, well, can you just do this? And so we have a new model where we essentially partner with the company and we handle all of the front end heavy lifting. So like we're going to handle your job postings, your headline testing. We're going to kind of understand what makes you great and do a competitor audit and a local labor market audit. And then we're going to generate the candidates and filter them. So if you were our client, you would just show up to a final vetted, like if you tell me, "Hey, Matt, superintendent has to live within 30 miles. They need 20 years of, or 10 years of super experience. I want them as a carpenter in the field for at least 5 early in their career." Like you lay that out, you won't talk to anybody that doesn't meet that criteria. And so we kind of streamline hiring for companies and we take apart or take away the technical part in the front end, like getting to candidates within the first 2 or 3 minutes of when they apply, right? Like there's all these things that we can do that unless you have somebody fully trained and dedicated to do it, becomes difficult.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I want to dive into today about what you're finding, what you're doing to get more women hired into companies. So and I kind of want this just to be like a workshop discussion between us because I think You probably have a lot of great ideas. I have a bunch of ideas. I think just together having this conversation for the listeners, like they're going to have additional ideas as well. It just kind of stimulates that conversation. So, one of the first questions I want to ask is, have you noticed that there are certain things that you put in job descriptions that tend to bring in more women? If you tweak a few things, have you done much with that?
You know, specifically women, I think we're seeing more applicants in general, women and young people. And I think it's when we make the company, like, I guess going back to the whole Hollywood stigma, right? It's like I look at it as when we post for a company online, we have to undo what Hollywood did, right? And so, typically I mean, statistically, right? Like if you're looking at, Gen Z, or you're looking at women in particular, a lot of them are not already in the industry, right? So you're attracting outside talent. You're competing with,
Yeah.
like, for example, young people. You're competing with other, like, for example, I read a beautiful case study on what Chipotle did to attract Gen Z workers and reduce their turnover, which was fascinating. But you're either getting first time workers, or you're getting people who are not in the industry. So we think of it as making the industry look great. And then if we can make the industry look great, then it's like, how do we make the company look great? So we encourage career videos. We have exciting headlines. We do a local labor market audit to understand what are your competitors doing and offering that you're not, and what can you do to offer better. We interview or recommend interviewing your 3 to 5 top people, and really sitting down with them and understanding and saying, hey, Michelle and Jack, you've been here 15 years. Why do you show up every day? And that helps to pull those things forward, and then we put them in the job
Yeah.
description. So I think, I wouldn't say, I'd be lying if I said we have a specific model to attract women. That I don't believe we have that. I think we look at how can we generate more candidates across the board, and we do
Yeah.
that by making the industry and the company look better.
Well, and something that I have found to be true is to attract more women. A lot of times it's the language that's in there. It's about what's required versus what is desired, or what skill sets somebody'd like you to have versus what they're required to have. Because, and I don't remember the actual numbers and statistics on this, but when women see a job posting, they feel, and once again, to my audience, every time I say men and women, anytime I'm talking about gender, it is in generalities. I'm very aware that not all men and not all women feel the same way, but this is statistical information that I'm basing it on, sometimes based on my personal experience. But when there's a job description, women tend to feel that they have to meet 100 of the requirements before they will apply. I believe the statistic is that men feel they have to meet like 70. Maybe it's 50 to 70. Maybe it's less. Maybe I'm giving men a little extra here. But it's changing that wording to make them feel like these aren't requirements. These are what we would love for you to have, but we can also teach you to do that. Have you done any of that kind of have you had any success changing wording like that for any kind of applicants?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could find I don't know if I have it around here, but yeah, I mean, we split, like, yeah, the musts versus the maybes is an exercise we do with every client. We're like, be super clear on the must, because if somebody doesn't have this, you're not going to talk to them, right? So when you say 5 years, if somebody has 4, you're not talking to them. If you say, they have to live within 30 miles, or there's certain, or you like, what is a preference, is a big one, because obviously that reflects on us. Like if we're just barely, if they're like, if somebody started college, for example, if they're like, they need to have a 4-year college degree, right? And then that's required. It's like, well, what if somebody did 3.5 years and then dropped out? Would you want to talk to that person? They're like, well, maybe. It's like, okay, so is this a must or a maybe, right? How important is this? So we do a lot of that, and right down to, we do a lot of headline testing. So we test everything. So we're very granular with every part of the hiring process. So, you might have a job posting that's like hiring project manager, and we're going to run different headlines and see which gets higher clicks. So every single piece of a job description that we work on is carefully crafted to identify what's required versus what's preferred, how to attract a wider audience, and then how to make it exciting, because at the end of the day, it's a job advertisement, not a job posting.
Are you helping clients with the interview process? Is your team part of the interview process?
So we do the first round interview. So we
You
can
do.
completely take care. Yeah, exactly.
And has there been anything in there that you've learned that tends to be gender specific, good or bad?
It's a good question.
Oh, I thank you.
I mean, they're all good, but gender specific. I mean, nothing's jumping out. I would say, yeah, I can't think of anything that jumps out as, hey, this is extremely different. And that might be, just due to the fact that there's less women applicants, less female
Yeah,
applicants.
that's true. You know, one of the things that I have noticed in an interview, especially over the years, how it's changed is when I started in the industry, I expected to be the only woman sitting at the table. And now the young women that are walking into these interviews, if they are the only woman sitting in that room, sitting in that interview, they're really likely to give it a no. Even with a really good offer. I knew I would be forging a trail for myself. And I think that now more of the young women are like, they've come up with women that are in the classes with them. They've come up with women who are in college with them. They have um they're just used to being around other women, and they walk into an organization that is so heavily male populated that when they're sitting at that table, it just doesn't feel like, well, where is the opportunity for me, right? Like maybe I get in the door, but who's really going to shepherd me along? Who's going to be that mentor? And, some companies don't have women at the top yet. That's one of the things that I'm working to change, right? Is help people develop women into leadership positions. But if you don't have a female at the top, are there any suggestions that you have in interviews for your clients that you can help a female applicant feel like there is a real path for you here, even though you may not see it at this table? I'm putting you
So,
completely on the spot.
no, no, I love it. I love it. Well, I think every company's different, right? And so I think the first thing we try and identify is I think some companies are so in need of people that they're like, hey, just get me candidates, right? Like they're like, hey, young, like there's no age, which I mean, we don't have clients that have a preference there, but I mean, there's physical demands to the role. But so we have a lot of clients that are like, hey, we need people. In terms of the leadership side, I think that's our job is to amplify the culture of the company that we work with. So I think the tough part is, we do this across the US, we're in Canada. So when I think of this, I'm thinking of so many different companies, like I'm thinking of some that really embrace kind of are at a spot where they're like, okay, our company's stable enough where we're looking at, diversity as a whole within the company. They're looking at, how can they train the next generation of workers, right? Team members in their company themselves. And then we have other companies that are like, look, I'm down 3 people. Everyone's doing overtime, everyone's stressed. We just need people. And so as I think about this, I'm thinking about a lot of different types of companies, but I think I guess the ones that are in a place where they're not in a dying need and they're like, hey, we're stable. They tend to have more, they tend to be open to more specific feedback and where we can kind of craft job ads for different archetypes. So for example, if it is a leadership position, we might craft a role towards that would attract a different type of person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we'd be open and they would be open to testing that. And that's kind of how we can see what the labor market has available.
I had never thought about it in those terms. I've thought about it, but not in the terms of company stability. Because it does make a difference. If a company is just like they're sometimes, how do I want to say this? Let me back up. Um, if they are at a point where things are running really smoothly, it does open their minds to step outside of the box that they are typically hiring from. And I think that's a really great point. So I want to transition and ask, I know you have had tradeswomen in the field in the past at your company. And I know you've got women on the operations side. What what do you feel women bring to the industry that maybe companies and individuals don't realize is are really good assets?
Gosh, I mean, there's a lot. I think when you start integrating women into a predominantly male driven company and culture, you find that it changes the whole temperament of the team. I mean, I remember when, we brought in, upper leadership and it was a woman. I mean, the meetings got more structured. It changed kind of I mean, all for the better.
Yep.
I find that women were able to, especially in leadership and field positions, we're able to communicate things a little differently. I think if you could get to a point where there was that respect, right, and that established respect, because I think I heard you in one of your earlier podcasts talk about that. Like when you walk up, it's like, or when you got to a leader, I think it was a foreman or a site super, and they didn't want to listen to you. They were like not going to take direction. I think if you can break through that, what you find is you're able to communicate messaging a little bit differently. Like hard conversations become easy. And I found that to be very profound. Like I remember when we first brought in our upper management, we had brought in a woman and she was able to get some of the things like we couldn't there were certain technology things with some of the guys in the field that they were having trouble adopting, and it was like there were these little things in our process that like were happening, but it was like, hey, did you do this? Or we had all these reminders, and she took it upon herself to meet with them, figure out what was going on, train them, and they listened in a way and followed through in a way that I think we were maybe hitting the nail on the head a little too hard, and she found a way around it. Like I think she was able to connect with them in a way and get them to see it. And so I think there's a lot of different I think there's a lot of benefits. It changing culture, I think a change in viewpoint of the team. I think you can get a lot more things sometimes passed across. It's just a different it's great in my experience. I mean, it was a game changer.
I think a lot of what you're talking about goes toward where women tend to be more relationship driven and men tend to be more task driven. And it's that relationship element that so many women have that makes them develop a relationship through connection, right? Like or I'm sorry, develop processes or develop change through connection. So these things that maybe you were wanting to do that just weren't getting there because um, as men, they tend to be like, here's what we need to do. We just need to go do this. And it's hard to get somebody to tell them, you need to go do this. Once you make a relationship, you make a real connection with someone and you develop that relationship where they want to do something for you because it makes your life easier. Like that's real, right? Like it's not because you told them to. It's still the same amount of work, but they're doing it because it makes something easier for someone else in the company, or maybe it will make their life better, but nobody took the time to explain it. Because I would bet when you were coming up, similar to me, when we were asked the why, we were told because I said so, and
Yeah.
that's the world is changing. Millennials and Gen Z have said, no, 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 you got to tell us the why, right? But women tend to just like right now, women tend to be a little wordier, and we're trying to give all the details that just makes somebody understand something a little more instead of here's what it is, just need you to go do it. So all that to say, I think it's so much about that relationship part of how women bring people together and drive those connections.
And the follow through. I mean, I find a lot of follow through or organization
Oh,
was big, and I think the lack of ego and this is just my personal experience, but I think one of the things I loved about when we really started hiring more women in the company was just the lack of ego. Like it was just like we'll do it. Like hey, like I mean, it was just in all different types of tasks, field or office. It was like we'll just get it done, and I think that really it they changed the morale of the company in a good way. So, yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part, if you can break through that barrier of respect, right, and get to that point, which
Yeah.
for us wasn't hard. I mean, because our team, our culture is all about, um, we're much more around the performance of the individual as opposed to you've been here for 10 years. Like that's not, the
Yeah.
benchmark for me. So that was easy for them to fit in. So I guess realizing just now as I'm talking to you, I created a culture that made it very easy for women to join the company
Yeah.
because there was no like, hey, you've been here 5 years, or hey, I didn't have those stigmas because I told you earlier. I mean, I started in trade schools and in the field with family, so
Yeah.
I didn't have that. But I think if you foster a culture that allows for easy integration of women, and then you stabilize the hiring enough to where you can do it, I think that's an it factor for a company. Like I think it's a massive, massive opportunity. Um, I mean, you take two companies, you have one who does it and one who does, like one has an integrated mix of male and female, or men and women, and one who doesn't. I think the integrated company is going to win every time.
Yeah. And I mean, there's statistics that say companies are last time I saw it, 22% more profitable when there is a woman on the executive team. And is it because she's a woman? Is it because it's diverse, right? Like it's a different mindset than other people have at the table. But you're absolutely right that it's about leadership, fostering that culture. And um I was recently having a conversation with a friend of mine that she recently got multiple new teams put underneath her and under her umbrella, and she was really struggling with someone in particular, and she was trying to develop that or break through that level of respect, that you were talking about, how it is hard for women to break through that. It's hard for younger people to break through that. Like it's not just hard for women, but one of the best things that helped her with that is something that her boss said in front of her to this new employee that just made it. As soon as I heard that her boss said that, I'm like, oh, well, that's cleared up. Now this person knows they're not going to go around her and talk to him about it because he's already clearly stated she has my full support, right? Like, and I think too many times in our industry and probably others, people allow managers allow people to go around people to talk to them. I didn't say that well. So let me try that again. Leaders of companies allow lower level employees to go around their managers and talk to leaders. I don't really know why. Maybe they think it's an easy button, but when they just show that no, that I support my manager, there is a process here, it changes things, not just for women, but for everyone. But it is such a big changer for women because it helps when leadership exhibits that level of respect.
I never thought about it like that, but I mean that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense because we're big on chain of communication and kind of chain of position. I think that's a big thing for us. Um, and I mean, that's how we onboard, right? We're very clear. We're like, hey, this is this person's position. This is what they're doing. And then they kind of, they create the space, or we create the space for them to do the things that they need to do.
Yeah.
Huh. It's interesting.
Okay, so I want to wrap up and I want to talk about your 2.5-year-old daughter. So if she was if she was older, if she was getting in the industry today, what would your feelings be about that? What would you say to her versus what do you hope that you would be able to say to her by the time she is actually old enough to get into the industry? How do you think that's going to change? How do you want that to change?
Well, I think to answer the change question, I think we're going to find that construction's due for a big shift, and I think we're going to find a lot more women in construction, a lot more young people. I think that the industry is going to start finding ways to make a lot of this easier. I think that's going to happen. We had And I see a lot of clues to that right now. Even us just having this conversation, right? Like the conversation's happening a lot more now. There's people who
Yes.
are championing that, like yourself. So I'm hoping that, it's not even a weird thing. I mean, my hope is that in, let's look 16 years down the line, that it's just like any other career profession. Like she's a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is, that I'm like, great,
Yeah.
do what you love. Now I would say, I mean, if she were to go in now, I would tell her, I think number one, to make sure that she loved it. I think that's important. I think, to do it, to follow the thing that it really loves and enjoys doing. Um, and, uh, and to, um, and to understand, I mean, I can just go back to my experience being young, running jobs at 13, 14. And I think I would lay out some of the stigma, some of the things to be mindful of that can happen, some of the challenges that she might face unbeknownst to her, those difficulties.
Yeah.
And I think discipline's a big one, right? Being disciplined and setting an example, because I guess the big thing I would say is I think you'll, if you're given the opportunity, like I was at young, 13, 14, like there's going to be a lot more pressure on you to do it right. Like when I was 13 or 14 running jobs, there was a lot of pressure the first few weeks, right? Because they wanted the crew wanted to be like, hey, he's just the boss's son, or hey, he's too
Uh-huh.
young to do this, or there was a lot of excuses that they wanted to have. And so I think I would explain the importance of just understanding that there's going to be a lot of extra attention on those firsts, if you will.
Yeah. There's that disclaimer that still has to go in, right? Like in this day and age, there's that disclaimer that we've got to give those kids as they're entering. And I'm hoping that at least most of the disclaimer is gone in the next 10 years, There will always be some kind of disclaimer, but I'm hoping that a lot of it gender-based will be gone. All right, so my very last question, what is one constructive behavior that you would give to the audience members that could improve their success or their company's success? Anything.
I mean, my favorite thing to do, I think success leaves clues. And so I think if you can create the time and space to really just listen to people, and I mean truly listen, that's one of the skills that's helped me a lot, or behaviors, if you will. Behavior of listening more, and taking time out to really connect and listen to your team. I think you'll find that a lot of answers are already within the company, and there's some block that's preventing them from sharing it. That's
Yeah,
helped me a lot.
I love that. And I've enjoyed this entire conversation. So thank you for making time to do this today. I really appreciate it. And I feel like there are things that we will be able to do together in the future to make a big difference for this industry and the hiring of everyone.
I mean, you're already doing it, Barb.
We're
But
we're both doing it. We're both doing it.
yeah, appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.